Caution. Things can go wrong.
Okay, let's put some damn
have been heard. In 1992, one such accident, born of human error and critical lack of resources, answered the question, what would happen if you mistakenly put your hand in a particle
I'll chase that
accelerator?
night the kingdom come!
This is the true story of the accelerator accident in Hanoi, Vietnam.
Stupid! God, you're stupid. You're stupid. Suck my slut.
Pulsed in a precise way, changing electromagnetic fields can bend the paths of and accelerate charged particles. The first circular particle accelerator, what came to be known as a cyclotron, operated on this basic principle, a proton merry-go-round, as its inventor Ernest Lawrence called it. Modern circular particle accelerators are far more complex than Lawrence's 1930 invention, which won him a Nobel Prize. But the underlying idea of accelerating charged particles in circles to eventually smash them together and against objects revolutionized nuclear physics and has touched almost every branch of science, from the creation of artificial elements for physics to the eradication of tumors for medicine. The real power of a particle accelerator, large or small, is not that it can move atomic elements quickly. It's that they can move particles as quickly as physically possible. Everybody knows science's most famous equation, E equals mc squared. What most people don't know is that this isn't the full equation. It's actually E squared equals m squared c to the fourth plus p squared c squared. This second factor captures the momentum of some object. In everyday life, we are free to ignore this variable because most objects you're familiar with don't move very fast at all relative to the speed of light, and therefore, the vast majority of an object's energy can be suitably approximated simply by multiplying its mass by light speed. This is the equation that you know. However, when an object does approach the speed of light, its momentum dominates its total energy, and this, combined with a speed of light that is equal in all reference frames, is where we get the universal speed limit, c. Einstein's full equation can be shown to depend on just how close an object's velocity, v, gets to the speed of light, c. But as v gets infinitely closer to c, this factor will approach infinity, which means infinite energy, which we know is impossible. And so, nothing with mass can travel at or faster than the speed of light. High-energy particle travel in all reference frames is where we get the universal speed limit, c. Einstein's full equation can be shown to depend on just how close an object's velocity, v, gets to the speed of light, c. But as v gets infinitely closer to c, this factor will approach infinity, which means infinite energy, which we know is impossible. And so, nothing with mass can travel at or faster than the speed of light. High-energy particle accelerators like the Large Hadron Collider basically prove this. The LHC, the most complicated machine ever built, can accelerate particles to within just 3 meters per second of the speed of light, but no further. 99.999999% of the universal speed limit. A fantastic feat of engineering. Today, there are an estimated 30,000 particle accelerators worldwide. About half of them are used to insert ions and transmute materials, useful for semiconductor production, and the other half are used in radiotherapy to the benefits of millions of patients, with the small remainder of accelerators used in research. In 1992, a small laboratory in Vietnam was conducting research using another derivative of the cyclotron, a so-called microtron, when a concatenation of design flaws and human error cost the scientist his hands. In November of 1992, the Hanoi Institute of Nuclear Physics was using one of its two microtrons. The aged accelerator, an experimental model originally built in 1973, was given to Vietnam and the HINP by the former Soviet Union. The machine the facility sat in was installed according to old measurements taken in the USSR. There were no Vietnamese language manuals or instructions provided. The control panel for the microtron was entirely in Russian, No Russians worked at the Institute. The HINP's only working microtron was set up to fling electrons through guide tubes at tungsten and uranium targets, producing X-rays and neutrons, respectively. On the 17th of November, the day of the accident, the accelerator was directing electrons at the tungsten target, which would in turn produce a conical beam of X-rays inside of a wooden box that held a sample of gold to be irradiated. Typically, an experimental sample would be pushed into or out of the irradiation zone by puffs of compressed air. But on this particular afternoon, the facility director decided that since the first sample was to be changed in just an hour, he could do everything by hand. The first experiment went according to plan. The director and two assistants removed the first sample by hand and placed the second in the path of the X-rays that would scream out of the tungsten at the speed of light. All personnel left the concrete maze encasing the accelerator. Just outside the control room, however, the director asked an assistant to get him some soap to wash up with and, apparently, walked towards the sink in the courtyard. The assistant, passing by the control room on the way to the soap, told the operator that the experiment was ready and that the accelerator was ready to be switched on. What the assistant didn't know was that instead of going to use the sink, the director decided something was awry with the experimental setup and returned to the microtron without telling anyone. He placed his hands inside the wooden box and adjusted the gold sample 3 or so times over the course of a few minutes. His hands were less than a foot from the tungsten, which, unbeknownst to him, was emitting extremely energetic X-rays. At the same time, the assistant had retrieved the soap and arrived at the courtyard. The director wasn't there. She called his name several times, and then ran to the accelerator room. The door was open. She shouted again. Nothing. Her voice was apparently drowned out by the din of generators, air conditioners, and cooling systems. Fearing the worst, the assistant ran down to the control room to tell the operator to shut down the accelerator immediately. But by then, the director's hands, feeling nothing, had been unintended targets for 2 to 4 minutes. The worried assistant and operator turned off the machine and ran back to the accelerator. The door was still open. They found the director adjusting the experiment. He passed by them as if nothing had happened and walked to the courtyard to wash his hands. That's when he was told that the machine had been on for at least a few minutes while he was inside. The International Atomic Energy Agency's report describes that at this point, the director fell very silent. He walked to a room with a gamma spectrometer to check if the very atoms of his hands had been turned radioactive. The machine showed a well-defined energy peak of antimatter annihilations born of gamma-neutron reactions in organic tissue. At this point, the director knew he had been irradiated. But not how badly. Over the next few hours, everyone at the HINP heard about the accident, but no one did anything. The director rode home on his motorcycle as usual. That night, his hands felt strange, but he chalked it up to his rheumatoid arthritis. After 8 days of inaction, his hands were turning gray, but they functioned normally, and an annual checkup 2 days later didn't raise any questions, despite the director telling his doctor that he had probably been irradiated. She recommended a dermatologist for a possible vitamin deficiency. The next day, his hands were much harder to ignore.
You stupid motherfucker.
Painful. Still, the director
you could have
continued to
stuck your
work as
dick in
normal.
my butt.
It wasn't until 24 days after the incident on the 11th of December that he went to a specialized hospital. His hands were now deeply ulcerated and the tissue was dying. The anonymous director's treatment related to his irradiation would span the next 600 days.
Just move right here, you can stick your dick in my butt.
How do you build a facility that protects you from radiation while having a machine that generates intense radiation at the heart of it? The most effective and deceptive simple design is a maze, like one you'd solve with a pen and paper, only with concrete. Outside of accelerators and large electromagnetic influences, charged particles and photons travel in straight
He's bringing out that whore!
And one of the most efficient ways to put as much material between you and a beam of radiation is to put as much stuff as possible between you and the source. The hard 90-degree angles of a concrete maze both maximizes the amount of material between beams and bodies, and makes it much harder for any surface reflections to travel very far. The HINP had a maze around its microtron as well, but notice that where the maze was placed was preventing radiation from leaking into the courtyard, and not the offices where the scientists worked for hours on end. The maze principle applies all the way down to the fibers and cables of the facility. Anything that connects a room full of radiation to the outside world, even a surface duct, should be oriented in such a way to minimize the strength of escaping radiation. In this case, only allowing scattered radiation to escape instead of direct radiation. In Hanoi, at the time of the accident, cable and ventilation ducts passed through walls in straight lines. And the doors of the facility were parallel without the recommended bends and lead traps to protect X-rays. The most basic protection at a radiation facility, however, is the material surrounding an accelerator or source. Radiation, as particles and photons of any energy, will eventually stop after enough nanoscopic collisions inside the material. So the denser the material, the better. How much of the material you need for a facility can be calculated using the so-called half-thickness, which is the depth of some material that will reduce the intensity of ionizing radiation to 1/2 its initial value. The half-thickness for concrete, with respect to different radioactive sources, can be as small as an inch, which is why it's used for shielding the world over. Steel, lead, and uranium are even more effective, but more expensive. The MT-17 microtron, shipped from the Soviet Union and built in Hanoi without any Vietnamese language instructions, was placed in a facility with concrete walls of, quote, unspecified density. No other details were available. It was later calculated that the radiation dose rate for those working every day in HINP's microtron control, which was never measured to check shielding efficacy, was 5 times higher than the ambient levels in the ghost city of Pripyat, 2 miles outside of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And on the roof of the institute, this dose rate was 150 times higher than that. The news at Vietnam's Center for Burns wasn't good. Later investigation by the IAEA would find that the dose rates where the director's hands were placed were extremely high. 20 different sprays, depending on exactly how long his hands were adjusting the experiment, which he couldn't remember. A whole-body dose of 5 or more grays is fatal. Thankfully, because of the directionality of radiation, the director's whole-body dose was minimal. But his hands were due from the start. The progression is typical for acute radiation injuries, forever festering wounds that defy treatment and refuse to heal. They would get better, then much worse. Within a few weeks, it was clear drastic measures had to be taken. 3 skin grafts were attempted from January through February. 2 of them failed. In March, an IAEA physician recommended removing the most damaged finger. It was amputated on the 23rd of March, 1993, and sent to a biophysics lab in Moscow for study. A grisly decision, but very useful. You don't often get an irradiated human body part to research. 159 days after the incident, the director was moved to a hospital in Paris. In May, another finger was removed, and the right hand was surgically embedded in the director's own abdomen with the hopes of preventing infection and encouraging tissue growth. On day 190, the right hand was removed from this natural pocket. The left hand improved. The right never did. The director's right hand was amputated at wrist level on July 9, 1993. At this point, the director's left hand appeared to be on the mend, but as is the sinister nature of radiation injuries, the damage is to get deep. In October, necrosis returned to the 4th and 5th fingers on his remaining hand. By the 443rd day after exposure, both damaged fingers had been removed. All that could have been saved of the director's hands, which wasn't very much, had been. He was finally discharged after moving in and out of hospitals for almost 600 days. The accelerator incident in Hanoi is overshadowed in nuclear history by the most famous accident of the same type, when Anatoly Bedorowski accidentally placed his head in a particle beam. It's mostly famous for what didn't happen. Anatoly survived. It begs the question, why didn't Anatoly lose his head when the director in Hanoi lost most of his hands? I believe it has something to do with what is known as the Bragg peak of different kinds of radiation. Protons, electrons, photons, and other particles each have their own interactions with matter. As such, each deposits its energy along the path of travel differently. Anatoly Bedorowski's head encountered a proton beam, which deposits the majority of its energy more than 20 centimeters into human-like tissue. Since 20 centimeters is longer than most human heads are deep, the majority of the energy that hit Anatoly did not stop in his brain. If it had, he would have died instantly. The Hanoi director's hands encountered an X-ray beam comprised of photons. These deposit the majority of their energy very quickly before moving through much tissue. The depth of an average hand is within this peak, and therefore, the intense energy of the microtron in Hanoi did not peacefully pass through. It fatally irradiated most of the tissue it touched. This was later confirmed by an IAEA member visiting Vietnam after they placed a fresh chicken leg in the path of the same beam and checked it for antimatter annihilation. It was the opinion of the International Atomic Energy Agency that the accident in Vietnam was bound to happen. The developing country, owing to a serious lack of resources, did not have a solid radiation protection infrastructure. There were no trained inspectors to tour facilities. The Hanoi facility was built based on foreign language instructions from the Soviet Union. There was no radiation monitoring equipment to tell personnel that, when the machine was on, they were receiving a dose higher than walking around Chernobyl. There were only handwritten manuals for equipment and nothing for radiation protection procedures. Irradiation times for the microtron had no automatic cutoffs and were instead timed by wristwatch. Staff relied on word of mouth that no one was in the accelerator room before the machine was switched on. The list of faults can and does go on. Quote, the standard of radiation safety at HIMP before the accident was so low that an accident was not unlikely. After IAEA intervention, the HIMP fitted a magnetic interlocking padlock to the accelerator room door. An alarm near the microtron that the control room could sound was installed. Other buttons and lights inside and outside the accelerator room were added and integrated, as there was, quote, a fundamental need to inculcate a sense of responsibility for safety, a safety culture in all concerned, end quote. Vietnam, by the IAEA's estimation, had prioritized meeting the immediate needs of the country that nuclear physics and research can provide, not nuclear safety. The engineers and scientists at the Hanoi Institute of Nuclear Physics had the highest academic qualifications possible, but they did not have the training, resources, or regulatory oversight to prevent one of the worst particle accelerator accidents in history. As is so often the case in these stories, it wasn't an intrinsic feature of nuclear physics or engineering that caused human harm. No, it was all too human behavior. Guessing the positions of personnel, wanting to change an experiment by hand to save time, assuming that if you can't feel something, nothing has happened. In the summer of 1994, after losing the majority of his hands, the anonymous facility director returned to Hanoi. Until next time.
Stupid fucker. God damn it. God damn it. God damn it. Jesus fucking Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Jesus fucking goddamn Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Jesus fucking goddamn cunt Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. God damn it. God damn it. God damn it. God damn it. Jesus fucking Christ. Damn, I fucked it. Oh! Damn, I stuck my dick up his butt. And twisted. Only one piece was lost. That damn poem. Let's see. Let's see if he had moved here. Or he'd go here. No, that wasn't. Wow, she got some Uzi. Wow, these girls got some spit arms. Vanessa Brown used to sing this song with me. Wow, she's got some spit arms too. Pit.
If I had a little white box, put my Jesus in, I'd take him out and hug him tight, share him with a friend. If I had a little red box, put the devil in, I'd take him out and stomp him out, put him back again.
With a spin fit.
If I had a little white box, put my Jesus in, I'd take him out and hug him tight, share him with a friend. If I had a little red box, put the devil in.
With spit. With their spits. The share of a spit effect on with a spit effect. With the spit effect.
It's no longer I that live, but Christ.
With the spit effect.
Where?
I love you.
Spit.
Never know how much I love you. Este es mi número. Si tú me fastidias más, te voy a dar una garnata que te vas a abrir.
I just shit in my pants.
Like and subscribe! Hi kid, if I were to tell you, think of a place that's south, you would think of...
Straight one ball, two on Mickey. Steps out of the batter's box.
Wait, silent life to you, and one of these days, mark my words, you're going to regret it.
Ethel, please! My new wife!
Oh, I remember that. With her Uzi spit.
If I had a little white box to put my Jesus in, I'll take him out and share him.
She has some spit on
Take
it.
him out and share him with. Had a little white box to put my Jesus in, I'll take him out and share it with a friend. And if I had a little red box to put the devil in, I'll take him out and smash his face and put him back again.
Wait, does she have a did she have cool spits, man? Oh, here goes the spit effect one. With the spit effect. With a spit effect. With a spit effect. Spit effect, Carrie Hilson. Okay, let's fuck some tail. Okay, let's stick my dick up some tail's butt. Suck my slut. Suck my slut. Move, slut. Well, I'll put your black ass for stolen, even if you're white. You slant-eyed slut from China! You Chinese slut-eyed slut. Uzi girl, with a spit effect. With a spit effect. With a spit effect. Spit effect, Carrie Hilson. Spit effect, Carrie Hilson. Spit effect, 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 with a spit effect. Carrie Hilson. She smells like spit. She smells like spit. Suck my slut.
In another Hellenistic Egyptian text called the Oracle of the Potter, written around the time of Manetho, it purports to be an ancient prophecy given to Amenophis. It predicts a time of drought, a darkening of the sun, and other hardships that will only end when foreigners and their religion are expunged from Egypt. It also predicts that when that time comes, Alexandria, the city of foreigners, will be abandoned. Continuing Manetho's story, the rebels send an embassy to Jerusalem, inviting the Hyksos shepherds to come fight against Egypt. Some 200,000 shepherds answer the call and come to Avaris. And King Amenophis remembers the seer's warning. He gathers an army to confront the rebels, but then changes his mind and retreats to Ethiopia. This purely fictional story is an allegory for King Nectanebus II, who similarly fled to Ethiopia when Artaxerxes III invaded. According to Manetho, these rebels and their Hyksos allies set fire to the cities of Egypt, pillaged the temples, and mutilated the statues of the gods. Manetho then, as an aside, says that according to Egyptian gossip about the Jews, this priest, Osiris, was the same person as Moses. He also says there is much more Egyptian gossip about the Jews that he will not discuss. We can assume it was not good gossip. To To summarize, Manetho's second story is about the return of the Hyksos from Jerusalem to Egypt, where they joined forces with leprous priests to pillage Egypt and its temples. It is not a historical event, but an allegorical tale about the reign of terror under Artaxerxes III and the impious foreign cult of Seth-Typhon. However, by Manetho's time, this backlash against foreigners might have included the Jews, and some Egyptians were spreading gossip that equated Moses with Osarseph, the priest from Heliopolis. Manetho himself does not appear to know anything about Moses or Judea beyond what can be found in Hecataeus' earlier account. In his daring 2006 book, Gamirkin made the proposal that the biblical Exodus story was created as a response to slander about the Jews that was circulating in the 3rd century BCE. According to this slander, the Jews were descendants of the hated Hyksos, and their leader Moses had been a renegade priest from Heliopolis. In essence, the Exodus story turns the tables, making the Jews the victims rather than the oppressors. It acknowledges the Hyksos link by placing the Jews around Avaris and blaming the Egyptians for their hatred of shepherds. It casts the Jews in the role of slaves that is filled by the polluted people in Manetho. And it presents the Jews as pious followers of Yahweh rather than Seth-Typhon. Earlier layers of the biblical story even say that the Jews were expelled from Egypt, while later layers changed this expulsion to an escape that the Pharaoh was opposed to. There are other parallels with the Exodus story that must also be noted. The Pentateuch has two strange references to leprosy. One is in Exodus 4, where Moses is able to turn his hand leprous and heal it as a sign to Pharaoh. The other is the story of Miriam being briefly stricken with leprosy as God's punishment for rebellion in Numbers 12. Both stories are plausibly intended to subvert the charge that all the Jews of Egypt had been lepers. Renowned Old Testament scholar Thomas Romer agrees with this interpretation, and he thinks Manetho's story is reflected in Deuteronomy 7:15 as well. All the dread diseases from Egypt that you experienced, Yahweh will not inflict on you. Romer says the biblical redactor opposes to the tradition of the lepers known by Manetho the affirmation that Moses' leprosy was only momentary. It happened in the context of a transfer of divine powers to him. Another scholar, J. Ruckle, has argued that the statement by the Pharaoh in Exodus 1:10 is based on the Manetho tradition. In this verse, the Pharaoh declares, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us, and get them up out of the land." The idea that Israel might join forces with Egypt's enemies is a blind motif that is abandoned in the rest of the Exodus story. However, it is a close parallel to the part of Manetho's story in which the seer predicts that the polluted priests will join forces with Egypt's enemies. Lastly, Philip R. Davies has noted that the obscure term Hasatsu, which seems to refer to an entity traveling with the Israelites in Numbers 11:4, could be related to the name Osarseph from the Manetho tradition. So the idea that parts of the Exodus story are dependent on the Hyksos tradition promoted by Manetho in the early 3rd century is already mainstream scholarship. Gamirkin simply goes a bit further in proposing that the main framework of the Exodus story is post-Manetho. Davies agrees that the conventional explanation that Hecataeus and Manetho knew a garbled version of the Jewish Exodus story is not necessarily correct. It remains possible that the narratives of Hecataeus and Manetho are a garbled form of the Judean story of an Exodus, in which the plagues, the name of Moses, and the departure of a group of people towards Judah had been transformed. But it is equally possible that the opposite is true, and that the story of the plagues and the transformation of an expulsion into a miraculous escape is a Judean revision of an older Egyptian story known to Hecataeus and Manetho.
Has she got Jules got arms?
Sometime after 250 BCE, a Jewish writer named Artapanus, who most likely resided in Alexandria, Egypt, wrote a book called Concerning the Jews. This book has not survived, but summaries by the Greek scholar Alexander Polyhistor were preserved by some church fathers. Artapanus relates several traditions about Moses that are not found in the Pentateuch. A variant of these traditions is also known to Josephus, who does not cite Artapanus. In the surviving fragments of Artapanus' story, Moses was adopted by an Egyptian woman named Meris, who was betrothed to an Egyptian ruler named Chenephrus. Moses grows up to be a brilliant inventor and philosopher. He also divides Egypt into 36 departments and sets aside land for the priests. Chenephrus grows jealous of the admiration that the Egyptians have for Moses, so he sends Moses with an army of farmers to fight the Ethiopians, who are threatening Egypt, hoping that Moses will die in the process. En route to the Ethiopians, Moses founds the city of Hermopolis and consecrates the ibis there. Then Moses fights the Ethiopians for 10 years, but eventually befriends them and teaches them circumcision. Later, Chenephrus hires an assassin to kill Moses while he is attending the burial of his adopted mother. Moses learns of the plot and buries her in secret at a city that he names Meroe. After this, Moses flees to Arabia, where he lives with the chieftain Raguel and marries Raguel's daughter. Josephus' version contains the same general narrative and elements, but the details are somewhat different. Moses' mother is named Thermuthis, and Moses is put in charge of Pharaoh's regular army, not farmers. In this version, Moses has not found Hermopolis. However, he cleverly uses ibises to fend off dangerous flying serpents that block the way to the Ethiopian army. By traveling over land with these ibises, he is able to take the Ethiopians by surprise. He defeats their army and drives them back to their stronghold, a city called Meroe. As Moses nears the walls of the city, the Ethiopian king's daughter, named Tharbis, sees Moses and falls in love with him. He agrees to marry her as long as she hands the city over to him. Although Artapanus is assumed to have known that falls in love with him, he agrees to marry her as long as she hands the city over to him. Although Artapanus is assumed to have known the Pentateuch in its translation, the Septuagint, his story diverges greatly from it. In his understanding, the Jews are the kin of Abraham, who remain in Egypt when Abraham returns to Syria. And Moses comes along just one generation later. Only after Moses' campaign in Ethiopia does the king of Egypt begin to persecute the Jews. After this, Artapanus' story of Moses begins to resemble the biblical story of the Exodus more closely, albeit with major omissions. There is no death of the firstborn, for example. Instead, the king releases the Jews after a plague of hail and earthquakes that destroys all the Egyptian houses and temples. Was Artapanus actually familiar with the Pentateuch, or does his knowledge reflect an earlier incomplete form of those stories? According to Thomas Romer, the tradition of Moses as a conqueror is borrowed from the legend of Sesostris, a mythical king of Egypt, who was written about by Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus, and Strabo. According to legend, Sesostris was a brilliant leader who organized Egypt into departments. He was also a great strategist and waged war against Ethiopia, and was accompanied by his wife on his return. Herodotus also mentions a cult dedicated to the ibis because of their ability to repel the winged snakes of the desert. Some late elements of the Pentateuch may be based on this Moses legend. The plague of seraph serpents in Numbers 21 in particular echoes the flying serpents encountered by Moses in Ethiopia. And in both cases, it is Moses' ingenuity that saves the day. The strange mention of Moses marrying an Ethiopian woman in Numbers 12 is probably derived from the legend of Moses marrying the Ethiopian king's daughter. Including this detail in the Moses story might have been especially meaningful to the Judean diaspora living in Elephantine, near the Ethiopian frontier during the Hellenistic era. A fairy tale-like story about Moses' birth is told in Exodus 2. Here is a summary. An unnamed Levite man marries a Levite woman who gives birth to a baby boy. She hides him for 3 months, then puts him in a reed basket coated with bitumen and pitch, and she places it among the reeds of the river bank. The boy's sister, also unnamed, watches at a distance. When the Pharaoh's daughter comes to bathe, she sees the basket and sends her maid to bring it. They discover the child, which the princess realizes must be Hebrew. The baby's sister offers to go fetch a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. When the princess agrees, she brings the child's mother. The princess names the child Moses because he was drawn out of the water. The legendary birth story of Moses has many, many parallels in ancient literature. The most widely cited parallel is the birth legend of Sargon of Akkad, known from Neo-Assyrian tablets. My mother was a high priestess. My father I knew not. My high priestess mother conceived me. In secret she bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen she sealed my lid. She cast me into the river, which rose over me. The river bore me up and carried me to Aki, the drawer of water. Aki, the drawer of water, took me as his son and reared me. Aki, the drawer of water, appointed me as his gardener. While I was a gardener, Ishtar granted me her love, and for 4 years I exercised kingship. It is hard to deny the similarities with the reed basket coated with bitumen and the river in particular. And this legend was probably well known throughout antiquity. However, there are other details in the Moses legend that appear in Hellenistic myth. One such myth is the birth of Heracles. In that story, Alcmene is impregnated by Zeus and and gives birth to Heracles. But she fears the wrath of Hera, Zeus's wife, so she abandons Heracles in a field. Athene, Heracles' sister, rescues him and takes him to Hera, who agrees to nurse the child without knowing who the child actually is. However, the child sucks so strongly during nursing that he hurts Hera. So Athena takes the child back to his mother, Alcmene, to nurse him. Another interesting parallel, identified by Dr. Bruce Loudon, a specialist in Greek myth, comes from Ion, a Greek play by Euripides that was written between 414 and 412 BCE. In that tale, the woman Creusa gives birth to a boy after being raped by Apollo. To conceal his birth, she abandons him in a wicker cradle with two snakes as guardians. Hermes retrieves the infant and his cradle and places them on the steps of the Oracle of Delphi, where a priestess discovers the baby and decides to raise him. The boy grows up to be Ion, progenitor of the Ionians, and he is even named on the basis of a pun, much like Moses. This story motif was widespread in Hellenistic times. Classicist Dr. Iona Karamanı remarks in a recent book, "The exposure of a hero as a baby, his miraculous survival, and eventual restoration to his proper status constitute a common tale pattern found with a degree of variation in a wide range of Greek and non-Greek sources. This pattern is represented, for instance, in the well-known tales of Jason, Cyrus, Erythonius, Romulus, and Remus, as well as the story of Oedipus, Ion, Telephus, Alexandros, Hippothyon, Amphion, and Zethus, Neleus and Peleus, Aeolus and Boeotus. Holly, in particular, associated the seclusion and ordeal in the floating chest with rites of consecration of the young hero and his mother. Their miraculous rescue seems to demonstrate the child's divine election and predestination, as well as his mother's innocence. It's also interesting that Moses' sister is not named in Exodus 2. As Prop observes in his highly regarded commentary on Exodus, Miriam, as the sister of Moses, developed as a separate tradition. Miriam is Moses' kinswoman in the E source and his sibling in the P source, but she is non-existent in the J source. Moses' birth story with his unnamed parents and guardian sister seems to be an unconnected legend inspired by the multitude of Greek hero exposure myths that were around during the Hellenistic era. Let's circle back to the early Hellenistic tradition that Moses was the founder of Jerusalem. This tradition actually survives in the Bible as well. In a paper many decades ago, G.W. Ahlstrom pointed out that Samuel's farewell speech in 1 Samuel 12, which describes all the great works of Yahweh in Israel's history, states that Moses himself brought the Israelites into their homeland. When Jacob went into Egypt, and the Egyptians oppressed them, then your ancestors cried to Yahweh, and Yahweh sent Moses and Aaron, who brought forth your ancestors out of Egypt and settled them in this place. That Moses remained in the wilderness while Joshua led the Israelites into Canaan. 2. It shows no awareness of the conquest of Canaan. 3. If this tradition knew of any glorious conquest, it should have been included among Yahweh's mighty deeds. 4. it mentions no promise of the land, even though the promise to Abraham is a major part of the Pentateuch's narrative. Ahlstrom concludes, then, that the tradition of Moses leading the people from Egypt into the land of Israel was older than the tradition of conquest under Joshua. Ahlstrom's purpose for pointing this out is to show that the conquest narrative is a major part of the Pentateuch's narrative. Ahlstrom concludes to Abraham is a major part of the Pentateuch's narrative. Ahlstrom concludes, then, that the tradition of Moses leading the people from Egypt into the land of Israel was older than the tradition of conquest under Joshua. Ahlstrom's purpose for pointing this out is to show that the conquest narrative has no historical basis. For our purposes here, it supports the thesis that the legend of Moses, the colonizer of Judea, as recorded by Hecataeus, was the bedrock on which the later Moses traditions were built. As for Joshua, Ahlstrom suggests he was a local hero of one of the hill country clans that formed Israel. Only later was he associated with Moses and connected with the emerging conquest tradition. We suggest that the Joshua of 1 Chronicles 7:27, who is a 9th generation descendant of Ephraim, is the original Joshua. That Joshua has a father named Nun, just as in the Pentateuch, but Chronicles tell father named Nun, just as in Pentateuch. But Chronicles tells us that the land of Ephraim was settled by Ephraim himself.
Fucking stupid.
In this older tradition, Joshua never grew up in Egypt or conquered Canaan. Source criticism of the Pentateuch also supports the idea that the Jews originally envisioned Moses himself as the one who led the Israelites to Jerusalem. In a recent paper, Łukasz Niesiłowski-Spano points out that the passages written by the earlier J-source do not mention the wilderness period as a punishment from God. The key passage is Exodus 17, where Moses strikes the rock at Meribah to produce water for the complaining Israelites. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Yahweh?" But the people thirsted there for water. And the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to Yahweh, "What shall I do for this people? They are almost ready to stone me." Yahweh said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink." Moses did so. In the sight of the elders of Israel, he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and tested Yahweh, saying, "Is Yahweh among us or not?" This passage is later rewritten in Numbers 20, and it is there God tells Moses and Aaron they will not be allowed to enter the promised land. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Why have you brought the assembly of Yahweh into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die here?" Then Moses and Aaron went away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting. They fell on their faces, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to them. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and command the rock before their eyes to yield its water. Thus you shall bring water out of the rock for them. Thus you shall provide drink for the congregation and their livestock." So Moses took the staff from before Yahweh, as he had commanded him. Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their livestock drank. But Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me to show my holiness before the eyes of the Israelites, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with Yahweh, and through which he showed himself to be holy." We are clearly dealing with the same story, and it even occurs at the same location. But the punishment of Moses staying behind has been added as a new element. The presence of Aaron is also new. In another old passage called the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, Moses and the Israelites sing, "You brought them in and planted them on the mountain of your own possession, the place, O Yahweh, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, O Yahweh, that your hands have established." This is an obvious reference to the Jerusalem temple, and it is clearly linked to Moses here. Its inclusion implies an early stage of the narrative where Moses is supposed to have led the Israelites to Jerusalem and established the temple there. Yet another passage connecting Moses with the temple is 2 Kings 18. Hands have established. This is an obvious reference to the Jerusalem temple, and it is. This is an obvious reference to the Jerusalem temple, and it is clearly linked to Moses here. Its inclusion implies an early stage of the narrative where Moses is supposed to have led the Israelites to Jerusalem and established the temple there. Yet another passage connecting Moses with the temple is 2 Kings 18, which tells us that before Hezekiah's time, there was a bronze serpent in the temple made by Moses. It was called Nehushtan, and the Israelites worshipped it. We now associate this object with the story of the poisonous serpent sent by Yahweh in Numbers 21. But that story certainly did not exist in the 8th century BCE, nor does 2 Kings actually mention it. The story of the poisonous serpent sent by Yahweh in Numbers 21. But that story certainly did not exist in the 8th century BCE, nor does 2 Kings actually mention it. The most we can say for now is that in 2 Kings 18, Moses is directly linked with the temple. It is a well-established fact of biblical scholarship that the stories of Moses in the Bible do not depict literal history. These stories, like the rest of the Pentateuch, evolved and grew over time, and the final form of the Pentateuch contains numerous sources and layers that have been skillfully combined by editors. We still don't know when the final redaction of the Pentateuch was produced or how most of its stories developed. Though scholars today tend to date the development of the Pentateuch to the Persian period, a growing minority believes it was still in development during the Hellenistic period, after Alexander's conquest. Thomas L. Thompson has proposed that the dates and genealogies of Genesis are organized around a 4,000-year span that starts with creation and ends with the rededication of the temple under the Maccabees in 164 BCE, which would make the final Pentateuch a Hellenistic work, span that starts with creation and ends with the rededication of the temple under the Maccabees in 164 BCE, which would make the final Pentateuch a Hellenistic work, regardless of its sources. In his 2000 book on the origins of the Bible, he writes, "The formation of biblical narrative was a process that created the Israel we know. It had its earliest roots in the period of Assyria's domination of Palestine, but the understanding of Israel we know from tradition first arose during the late Persian or early Hellenistic period, and was not fully developed before the time of the Maccabees." Niels Peter Lemke proposes that the biblical history of Israel mostly took shape under Seleucid rule during the 3rd century BC, based on the pervasive parallels between Old Testament narratives and Greek narratives, especially those of Herodotus. In one of his books, he remarks, "During this period, we can expect an interchange between Greek and Babylonian culture, much in the way we find a blending of traditions in the Old Testament." Our intent in this documentary has been to present an alternate hypothesis about the invention of Moses and the Exodus narrative, based on the work of several like-minded scholars. Frankly, we have no way of knowing the true origins of the character Moses. The earliest traditions about him, which survive in a small number of Bible passages, and in the 4th century writings of the Greek historian Hecataeus of Abdera, are that he was a lawgiver and perhaps an Egyptian who founded Jerusalem and its temple, and who divided Israel into 12 tribes. Some of these facts might have originated as speculation by Hecataeus himself, based on similar legends and philosophical ideals about statehood. A few decades later, the Egyptian priest Manetho wrote a history containing 2 propagandistic stories about the Hyksos, whom Manetho inaccurately describes as shepherd kings. His first story states that the Hyksos founded Jerusalem after being driven out of Egypt. His second story states that the Hyksos had returned many centuries later at the invitation of leprous priests and other polluted men who had been oppressed by King Amenophis. Together, the Hyksos and the polluted men, who were followers of the god Seth-Typhon, had carried out a reign of terror across Egypt. This story was not based in any historical reality, but was an analogy for the invasion of Persian King Artaxerxes III and a condemnation of the wicked Seth-Typhon cult, which was by that time associated with foreigners. Manetho also knew of rumors in Egypt that connected the Jewish lawgiver Moses with Osiris, the leader of the leprous priests. A few more decades later, a Jewish writer living in Alexandria named Artapanus recounted the story of Moses and the Exodus that is lacking many of the details found in the Pentateuch about Moses' birth, the plagues, and the wilderness wandering. However, it includes an episode based on the Egyptian legend of Sesostris that portrays Moses as a brilliant leader and a military commander in Ethiopia who marries an Ethiopian wife. The Jews in Alexandria were aware of the tradition of Moses as their ancient lawgiver and founder of their homeland. They were also aware of the rumors associating the Judeans with the Hyksos and the polluted priests of Seth-Typhon. They pushed back against this slander with their own story about how the Hebrews, not the Hyksos, were the shepherds who had been wrongly held captive by an Egyptian pharaoh until Moses led them to their home in Judea. Over the following years, this story was refined further to include other traditions, such as the Ethiopian wife, the encounter with deadly serpents, and a fairy tale-like birth story that reflects the well-known Hellenistic motif of a male child who is abandoned at birth, raised by another woman, and eventually reclaims his rightful position as a great leader. Disproving this hypothesis should be fairly simple, if not easy. A single monument about Moses' exploits from before the 4th century would do it. A single reference to the books of Moses among the thousands of Persian-era Jewish papyri from Elephantine would also be sufficient. But we cannot find what does not exist. If Moses is indeed a Hellenistic creation, then efforts to recover earlier sources are doomed to fail. In the meantime, you can count on Mythvision to keep on pursuing the mysteries of the Bible and the origins of the Abrahamic religions.
Is the apologetics, the apologist side. You thought he didn't exist? How stupid. I can quote Bart Ehrman. And you Bart Ehrman is such an idiot.
He's the archaeologist, right?
They mock, right? They mock. And have you ever paused for 1 second and said, you mean the guy who thinks a virgin gave birth and a guy walked on water and a dude rose out of a tomb and ascended into a cloud and floated up into heaven? These guys who believe that happened are mocking you for thinking a guy may not have existed because your texts are full of holes, mythology, legend, invented narratives, fabricated material, most likely potentially even fabricated eyewitness stuff, like all of this.
Yep.
So when you see that rhetoric coming from the guys like Cameron Bertuzzi, right? His YouTube channel, he literally has he's interviewing priests, exorcists, about demons and crawling up the walls and speaking Latin and all this stuff. People believe this stuff that they're saying, and he believes it. And they mock mythicists.
Yeah, and I want to make something really, really clear. I'm no longer a mythicist. I've since gone more back to the middle, and I guess you can label me as a minimal mythicist, or I guess you think there's a guy, but you think the story's written about him.
Maybe a minimal historicist, I think, if you think there was.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, but you're more almost agnostic in the middle, neutral, but also lean. Maybe there was
I would say,
Come on, you moose!
past 90% of what's written about him didn't actually happen. It's either drawing from Old Testament motifs or cultural milieu in the time period. However, even though I'm not a mythicist, even though I've battled mythicists on my channel, I've had some videos made about me, about mythicists, I'm not very liked by the mythicist community.
Moose!
But let's get real here. People saying that mythicism is like flat earth of scholarship needs to go.
We're
talking about a guy who really might not have existed. We don't have physical evidence of him. We don't know where he was buried. None of his followers have written anything. We don't have anything written down from the actual Peter. Paul's letters come, but Paul never really was around Jesus, never met Jesus. He claims to see him in a vision. So everything that comes, all the evidence about Jesus comes from after his life. We don't have anything from the time in which he was alive, which means we don't have any eyewitness accounts. We have secondary accounts, people claiming to know eyewitnesses.
Right.
So right off the bat, we should at least be skeptical of what's going on here.
I agree.
The idea that this is accepted, it's figured out, let's not even debate this, that's flat earth, is nonsense. Because think about this. If you woke up tomorrow and the government and all the scientists got together and said, it's true, the earth is flat, how blown away would you be? That you just were wrong the whole time, and it turns out the flat earth people online were right. You'd be blown away. But let's say tomorrow you woke up and a bunch of experts in history or whatever, archaeology or whatever, found something that totally makes it impossible for Jesus to have existed. And you go, whoa, he didn't exist. Would you be just as shocked as you would about the earth being flat?
No.
So let's end the whole flat earth thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's an equivalent thing.
Or the moon being cheese, as Darwin says.
Right. I think that that's used because of, well, he's using polemics, and I think it's because there's this back and forth beef that's happened, so it's more rhetorical than actually like he's literally meaning.
I don't think it's fair.
Yeah,
I think it's a possibility that Jesus didn't exist.
I agree.
Even though right now as we speak, I stand thinking there probably was a guy
that was mythologized.
I think it makes the most sense with the data that we have.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't think that the evidence is good, they just want to think he didn't exist, or maybe he's being the character of Jesus Christ has some sort of like drawing from people that did exist. That's still mythicism. Still mythicism.
Yeah, you can be that.
You can be drawn from Simon of Galilee, Judas of Galilee, and they're sort of making a composite character. Whatever. I'm just saying, I'm throwing an example. Someone might hold that opinion, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything crazy about that at all. The one thing that I do, I'm not sold by, is it's a more modern approach to mythicism, where instead of just saying the whole thing was made up, as you get from the 19th and 20th centuries mythicists, what I've seen recently is the different approach where it seems like there's more like stretching evidence, like, there was a cult of a Jesus cult worshipping a godlike being named Jesus in these Jewish communities, and then he became humanized. I don't see that. I've never been sold by that. I don't think there's any evidence to support that. So I just want to give myself a
Yeah, I get it. You're saying this should be taken seriously. We should have this discussion, and it's interesting to have a different take being brought into the picture. And it shouldn't be equated with flat Earth or denying the Holocaust or any of this kind of stuff. But at the same time,
I think the old model of mythicism makes more sense than the newer model.
Okay. Well, I just think the people, just so we're clear, that are telling you to like laugh it away and stuff, typically are coming from people who are typically telling you, I believe this dude was born of a real virgin, ignoring all the other divine births, or willing to say this one special one happened.
Or you get people like Tim O'Neill, who is just, he just has a bone to pick with mythicists because they've been going back and forth for so long. And so it seems like he's sort of locked in, and anyone who holds that position is an idiot, not following the scholars, dumb, doesn't read, that type of thing. So I do think that emotional response isn't just people who believe in, people who hold to historicism. The emotional response isn't just people who believe, but it's also people who have some sort of beef with mythicists.
Again, do you think ego?
Like criticized him because he said the word wrong in Greek. He defined Guinness, I think it was something like that. I remember Guinness style or something.
Born of a woman or something.
Yeah, and he made a claim that was wrong, and they're all like laughing at him for it. So now he wants to make fun of it. I get it.
I get it. Back and forth. Yeah, I want to get into a few things that made me think maybe some of the mythology, and there's overlap of strange stuff that, like you were bringing up an example in this Roman book of when the celebration or Easter takes place in the stories of the Gospels, literally historically, the setting is under Tiberius. Jesus is actually living in the 30s under Emperor Tiberius. So here you have this emperor. Is it Claudius? Or
Claudius.
Who actually creates this? Discuss that example of Attis there.
These are some of the things that make me go, mythicism needs to be back on the table.
Or at least an option, right?
Yeah. So this is another published book by Blackwell called The Cults of the Roman Empire by Robert Turkin. And right off the bat, in the first chapter called The Great Mother and Her Eunuchs, he talks about this festival by the Romans called the Hilaria. James Fraser writes about
Move,
this
you
as well.
slut!
He says, at all events, it was apparent. Actually, let me go back a little bit. Let me start with this period. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to get to the big points.
Okay. And just so we're on the same page, like you can disagree with the whole category of mythicism and still say this might actually make you think that this didn't happen historically. This example of Jesus may have been invented based on.
Did he actually go down for Passover on March 25th
and died? Or is that invented narrative?
Right. He might have died in September.
You don't know when he might have died. Right.
You just accept that he went down on Passover.
The Gospel
says so.
Right.
But this might make you think otherwise, because look, the chapter's called Imperial Phrygianism. And the reason why I say that is because in 204 BCE, right before the Romans defeated Hannibal, they're still a little republic. They're not a big empire yet. Hannibal's whooping them. Apparently, this is mythological, obviously, this is legendary. This is what the sources say. Livy says this. Apparently, the Sibylline oracle told the Romans to go to Phrygia and import the statue of the Great Mother, Kybele. And they go and do this. They bring the mother back, set up the statue of the Great Mother. They institute a new cult, Phrygian cult of Kybele in Rome. And apparently that's how they won the war against. Of course. Okay. So now that's the backstory. 200 years later, now we're in the empire. Claudius is like the fourth emperor. I think it's Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius. Fourth emperor, I was right. Good guess. Claudius comes along in the 40s AD, right after Jesus dies in the 30s. This is what happens. He says, the grandson of Livia Augusta, belonged to the family. That's why it's called the Julian Claudian dynasty.
Right.
This is Claudius. The grandson of Livia belonged to a family whose clan name was Attius, Attaius, and went back to the famous Sabine Atta Clausus and recalled the very name of Attis, Papa. Claudius took great interest in the mysteries of Eleusis when he tried in vain to bring across the herbs, and his erudition, encouraged by the historian Livy, I'll just tell you the story, had perhaps led him to read the work of Timotheus on the religion of Pessinus. And I'll explain this. Timotheus is a 3rd century BC Hellenistic author living in Alexandria under Ptolemy, who writes the myth about Attis.
Got it.
That's the myth of Attis that we have today, about Attis being beloved by the Great Mother, dying of castration, and the Great Mother rising up, making him a god in the form of a pine tree.
And by the way,
A very odd resurrection. It's almost not a bodily resurrection, it's an agricultural resurrection.
Got it.
Very prime example of that. And so that's that. So he's saying that Claudius is bringing this into the fold of Roman religion at that time period. In the 1st century, remember that. This is before the Gospels are written. Of course, this is before Paul's epistles are already finished. He might have had one of them out by this point. I don't even know when Paul's in the 40s, 50s, right?
I'd say like 40s into the 50s.
Yeah, so we're talking 40s. We're talking Paul is running around the Mediterranean. This is just getting started in Rome. And by the way, before this, they did have a Great Mother festival called the Megalesia, which was the first week of April. So there already was a precedent. They already had an April festival for Kybele and Attis. But this one is different. This one is focused on resurrection. I'll explain. It says, Claudius instituted and had inscribed the Roman calendar, a ceremony which, after a fashion, opened the holy week of the god Attis. The entry of a tree On December 22nd, the Brotherhood of Woodcutters, Dendrophori, wood bearers, would trace its foundation to an August 1st birthday of Claudius, carried in procession to the Palatine Temple a pine tree felled in the memory of the tree at whose foot Attis had destroyed his virility, capturing himself. The festival implies at least part of the cycle of celebrations which, in later calendars, mark the second fortnight in March. For that procession of the tree, they liturgically reenacted the phases that were indissociable from the foundation myth. I'm going to blow past this all.
The foundation myth being
the castrates of Attis dying
into the tree.
Mourning by mother, by the great mother, mourning over the death and his resurrection.
Got it.
On the third day. And I'll tell you why. He says, on the 22nd of March, a pine tree had been cut. At the end of the night, a ram was sacrificed, its blood bathing the roots of the tree. There's another example of being washed in the blood of a sacrificial animal. And we talk about Dionysus as a bull.
Yep.
Talk about, and by the way, in this cult, you can look this up. It might not be in this chapter, but in the cult of the Great Mother, just like it's also in the cult of the Mithraean Mysteries, they both did this. It's called the Torabolium. They would have an initiate sit in a chamber, and they'd bring a bowl in the top chamber, and the blood would wash the new initiates. They were washed in the blood of the sacrificial animal.
And I don't want to make parallelomania here about the cross, but being a piece of wood stake, that is kind of interesting. I mean, you're dealing with wood. This could be complete parallelomania. I am definitely just throwing spaghetti.
But let me say something about that. Jesus still could have been crucified, and they could have thought, hey, that's like Attis in the tree.
Right, he's trying to say, I mean, like, there's examples of Odin, right? There's examples of Odin on a tree self-sacrificing. So the tree motif is there, and we're not saying necessarily the cross is that. But notice even today how prevalent a bloody Jesus on a cross is for Christian mythology. So whether or not
they do. I'm sorry.
No. I'm fighting with you, dude. Please.
Finish your thought.
I just wonder, completely speculative, and someone will get into the details and pick me apart. I don't agree, this is different. But, because Jews were commonly crucified. But the question is the mythos, the narrative playing into this tree motif of a lamb, symbolized human, being sacrificed on the wood of this tree? That here's this ceremony, but it's in a Judaic context.
And get this, they have, on the Day of Blood, which was March 24th, they would actually have people, frenzied rites of scourging, they call it, the Day of Blood Sanguis. And they would bring people out in the streets of Rome in the procession, and they would whip each other. They would hurt, they would do like symbolic whipping each other, because this is like, I don't know, it's part of
There's a self-sacrificial pain, maybe.
But think about Jesus carrying his cross, being whipped by a Roman soldier. And this is in Rome.
Yeah. So, and the fact that Jesus is wearing a purple robe, and it's a mockery of Roman emperor, and it's like, dude.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So we have that. We have I didn't finish what I was saying about the March 22nd thing.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. A pine tree was cut. They fell the pine tree. It bathes in blood. They do this thing where people are getting whipped in the streets. They're all like frenzied up. It's a really crazy experience. They did a processional funeral through Rome, and that's the day they mourn for the death of Attis. An image of Attis had been attached to the tree as it's buried.
Okay, pause. We just need to say something about that. When you see an image of the cross with an image of Jesus on it, you can't tell me that there's not, like, you can understand why I'm thinking early Christians have a man on a cross, okay? Like, there is clear iconography of Jesus. It's not just a fish symbol. Like, you get Christians who start symbolizing clearly having Jesus as an image on a cross, a tree, a wooden, it's not a living tree, it doesn't have the greenery, it's a stake or wooden cross post. So, you know,
and like I said, he could have been crucified still. We're not have to assume it's drawing from this, but they could have said, him being crucified is a lot like Attis being pinned to a tree. And then they could have drew the motifs up together.
Clearly, if Roman emperors which would have made the propaganda of this particular cultic practice spread through like wildfire in the empire. If there are Gentiles in the empire who are seeing this and are attracted into the Attis mythology and motif of the Caesar, and Jesus is constantly propagandistically being the new emperor and the better one that brings peace, the Pax Romana, forever, not a temporary Pax Romana.
You're getting ahead of me.
Okay, sorry.
So, no,
I'm hyping
you already know where I'm going.
Okay,
That's all I gotta say.
got it.
But I want to finish the rituals.
Let's do it.
So you have the Day of Blood. On the third day, the 25th, the third day, marks, oh, by the way, he points out this, the author says, and this is true, I looked into the sources. In Egypt, they have the same festival, it's still called Ilaria, because Romans are in charge of Egypt. But it was for Osiris.
So what is the problem? So why can't it be?
They switched it from Attis to Osiris.
Why can't it be Jesus?
Right. And by the way, people have been pointing out that by this time period, in the 2nd and 3rd century especially, they're synchronized. I hate using the word syncretized, but that's kind of what they're doing. You have these Dionysian gods like Ion. Ion's a 2nd century god. You find mosaics of him in Syria. This god Ion, and these Neoplatonist authors are saying he's like the combination of Osiris and Adonis and Dionysus. So you have other gods. Like if it was to happen with Jesus, it could have happened, or if it happened with these other gods, Ion was to say that Jesus isn't a Jewish version of this. Right. But let's put that aside for now. On the third day, on March 25th, this is the exact same day that Jesus resurrects. On Easter Sunday. This is the same, according to the Gospels.
Yeah.
This is the day that Jesus is resurrected. March 25th. According to the Gospels. That's the 14th of Nisan.
Got it.
It lines up.
Hebrew calendar.
Yeah, Hebrew calendar. This is the 14th of Nisan. The resurrection of Attis was proclaimed. At least, he says, at least as the 4th century texts tell us. So let's be real. That's when we have a source from a Christian author mentioning he uses the word resurrection. Before that, we only know about like the festival was happening during this time.
Got it.
So we have sources. The source that actually says there's a resurrection is a 4th century source. And it says the dead Attis at the foot of the pine tree, a little Attis standing in some sense, was reborn. The name Ilaria means rejoicings. Okay.
So they're mourning 3 days before, which is the same day that the women mourn at the tomb. The disciples mourn. 3 days later they celebrate.
We have a ritual mourning, we have frenzied rites, we have a burial, we have a 3-day procession, and we have a resurrection and rejoicing in the same exact week as Easter.
Right.
Coincidence? Same exact week.
Coincidence.
Some people will say it was.
Of course they would.
And I've heard people say, hey, it is pretty interesting.
And it could be. Nobody's saying it can't be.
But I don't think so.
But it's hard for us when we've done, like, all right, let's shift off of that for 1 second, just to the Roman stuff. We have scholars who've written excellent commentaries on Mark, other texts that show that the Roman imperial cult, that author is well aware of it. They know what the Roman imperial cult teaches. They know their propaganda and are really working Jesus into a narrative to where he is better than Caesar.
Exactly.
So why is it that a festival that is literally like invented in a way, there's already something there, but like really capitalizing on this thing that's supposedly happening in the period of time in which they placed the Jesus character, this is when this cult practice happens. And why wouldn't this be influential? I don't understand.
This is the crazy thing. The Nicene preacher claimed in the 2nd century, so we're talking early on, Christianity is obeyed in the 2nd century. The Gospels are written at the end of the 1st,
potentially just century.
This might be within decades of the Gospels being written. There's a kind of the first generation of Christians, other than the actual disciples.
Right.
So like, that's almost like a proto-Christian time. They're not calling themselves Christians. They're just followers of Jesus.
And who knows how much change took place from the
That's what
first
I'm
century
saying.
to the second.
So we're talking the 1st century of gospel-reading Christians.
Got it.
The Nicene preacher, they call him, says in his own writings that he encouraged his Christians to go and watch the Ilaria, because you can see the mystery of Christ in the mystery of Attis. They sung a hymn they sung a hymn that was originally a Homeric hymn to Attis, and they applied it to Jesus. So it became Jesus. And in this hymn, you know what it says? You, the Egyptians call Osiris, all of Phrygia calls you Attis. The Syrians call you Adonis. In Greece, Dionysus. And they're doing a synchronistic hymn to Jesus.
Okay, Neil, here's your problem. Is that that's not technically true. Okay, but you're saying an ancient author, early Christian, is saying this is what the case is, and this is what he's saying.
Now, the source that we get that from is from
heresiologist.
From a heresiologist saying he's a heretic for saying this.
Right, of course.
But that's half a century later.
And even then, he's still pointing out what this guy said that's earlier.
Exactly. Half a century later, as Christians are developing and becoming more dogmatic, becoming more getting their creeds together, deciding what they want to be,
separating themselves from Judaism, separating themselves from paganism,
breaking themselves off, they're looking back at this famous Nazi preacher who everyone loved in his time.
Yeah.
He was very famous, and famous enough that they wrote 2 whole chapters on this guy.
Right.
Most people only get a paragraph. He had whole chapters just for him, how important he was.
Right.
It's only him, Valentinus, and Marcion get that much attention. Everyone else gets a chapter. This one guy, Saturnius, he was a heretic. He said this. Boom, done. Marcion gets 2 chapters. Valentinus gets 2 long chapters. Nazi preacher, he had the most attention. And so he had so much attention to him, it makes you wonder why. If he was just some random heretic, some idiot out there, today you get Christians on YouTube who don't belong to any particular church, and they come up with conspiracy theories about flat earth stuff, and no one's really taking that serious. You don't have the Pope coming out and saying, I gotta write a dissertation on this random YouTuber online. He's a heretic, we gotta get rid of this. No. The fact that the heresiologists had to spend so much dedication on refuting his stuff means he was leading people in a certain direction that they didn't like. They wanted to...
I think there's political reasons behind it.
Political reasons, right. But what it tells you is Christians early on were willing to look at Roman mysteries and compare it with their own.
Right. Yeah, and the question is, if they're willing to compare it, who's to say they aren't also finding inspiration when they're combating, or not just combating, trying to draw in Roman citizens who they want to make members of their own cult? How do you do that? You imitate in a way. You want to model your stuff in a similar way. So I guess it gets to this thing that recently happened with the Olympics. Everyone lost their minds, the conservative Christians lost their minds on Dionysus, purple dude on our table, in this well-known people dressed in drag. And they went, this is a mockery of Christianity and the Lord's Supper. If you don't think so, you're an idiot. And it's like, Then you go back and look at Renaissance art, notice there are Dionysian paintings that look a lot like Dionysus and Jesus, right, the Lord's Supper. Which, by the way, why this makes them so butthurt that a 1,500-year later artistic piece by Leonardo is now their canon, technically, that if you make an image of anything about it, it's kind of the same thing about making art.
Da Vinci painted tons of pagan stuff. He was not a perfect saint.
No, you showed me an image he did of Dionysus, too. Leonardo did one of Dionysus. So I just want to make the point that they're literally seeing parallels in this modern rendition of Renaissance art that they canonized into their faith to a point where they're mocked now, when a purple dude should have gave red flags out the gate. The problem is, they're seeing similarities, and the similarities to their mind are there. They're authentic connections. Whether or not correlation equals causation doesn't matter. And I want to get back to the text, which is why I'm going to do a documentary soon that's going to be paralleling these in this example and going into Dionysus and Jesus. But to use your point, right, we don't have the source that shows they literally invented the gospel narratives, modeling it after the Attis thing that you just described, but giving it its own narrative and its own mythic function within this particular literature of Jesus. We don't have the evidence of them saying, here's a smoking gun, we're doing this to model it and combat the Attis cult and the Roman Empire. We have evidence that they're combating the Roman imperial cult.
Yes.
We have evidence that they're propagandistically jabbing at Jews and Rome.
Yes.
And we have that evidence. They're clearly aware of the teachings and the claims of the Roman Emperor with peace.
With Divi Fili. the Son of God.
Son of God.
The idea of a gospel.
Right, or even legion, the Latin word of legion being brought into the Greek.
Yeah, evangelion is like you have the evangelions of Augustus set up as pillars all over the empire, even in the east.
Right.
And there it would be the Sebastos.
The question, I guess, once you get to the end of that, realizing there's this clear rhetoric and competition happening where Jesus is the real, through his lineage, he's the true Son of God. He's going to bring peace, not a Pax Romana that's temporary, which you just got to watch the Year of the Four Emperors to find out that the Julio-Claudian line isn't going to work. They're thinking this thing's going to collapse. So here you have someone who's making a claim for everlasting peace, not a temporary peace that's not really going to stand. So all of it's combative politically against the empire in many ways. And what ends up happening, in my view, is people will think that you and me are suffering from parallel mania because we think it's possible. We're not saying it is. It's possible that something like this, that's so influential to the empire and the people of the empire, that celebrate, they mourn, and then they celebrate the death and rise of their Attis figure in some way, shape, or form through festivity, that Jesus would also model that in Greek literature of the day. Like, what is it really ridiculous to think maybe something's going on? And this ties into the mythicist question. One could still say there was a guy. It doesn't matter which path you take, whether he's completely invented or there was a guy. And this still could be the case.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
That's where I'm at right now. I'm open to mythicism being true, and it's possible. I just don't think we have enough to say that it was all made up from thin air. I can't go either way.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, I'm in this space where I'm kind of just letting the evidence sit where it does and saying, okay, do we have anyone contesting his existence early on? No, we're not that. If we had that, I might look at it and see what he says about it.
Right.
We don't have that, so it's like, okay, all we really have to go off is people are saying there was a guy, and they're saying he's crucified, and the rest I can kind of fill in as mythology. Even like someone like Origen, early on, he's questioning Christianity. He's one of the first polemics against Christianity. Some people date him in 170, some people date him 130.
Celsus.
Yeah, you don't know exactly when he wrote. It can be anywhere between 130 and 170.
Got it.
So maybe I'm just going to say 150. This is part of the middle. He writes in the middle of the 2nd century, and he criticizes Christianity hard.
Yep.
He doubts the resurrection. He says, all we have to go, it's almost as if he only knows Mark, the early Mark. Because when he talks about Christianity, the story about Jesus, first of all, he thinks his father's name is Pantera, a Roman soldier.
Right.
That's historicist.
Yeah.
He's not doubting his father. He's not saying anything about virgin births or anything. He just says, I heard from rumors from Jews that his father was a Roman soldier named Pantera.
Right.
The Pantera thing was floating around that early.
Yeah.
People say that's a later Talmud legend. It's not. It's as early as it goes.
Clearly, he's hearing it.
Yeah, it's contemporary with it's a few decades after the Gospels. It shows up in the sources, in Celsus.
Right.
So that's the point to historicists. And then he says, all we're going off of is that there was 2 women at the tomb, and some angel told them that he resurrected. That's it? Why should I believe this? It's as if he only knows the earliest Mark. Remember how we talked the early Mark doesn't have a physical resurrection. So going off of what Celsus is getting, what he knows in his education and his investigation of Christianity, he thinks there's a guy who got crucified, but I don't think he resurrected. It's historicist.
Right.
It's a critical historicist.
Right. He assumes a lot of it.
And that's as early as we can go as far as like finding people who are not just accepting it full cloth.
Yeah.
So I think Celsus is important for that reason. Also, you can see the Christology developing. He's becoming more godlike as time goes on.
Yeah.
Mark's gospel, he's the Messiah. Maybe he resurrects, depending on how the oldest Mark says. And then the later gospels, Matthew, Luke, and John, develop him into more God. By the time you get to John, he's the Logos incarnate.
Yeah.
So that tells me that there was a development in this direction, not the other way around. Not that he started off as a god being worshipped by everybody, and then became man.
Right.
It looks the other way around.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's like gradual incline and growth. I like seeing these things that you point out, and I think that was one of the things that made me doubt his existence when I saw a lot of those coming from like Richard Carrier, Bob Price, guys like that. But I think some of the things we started to question made us think maybe there was a guy who actually got mythologized, and that's where we're at now. My goal in doing this video wasn't to critique it. it was to point out that we have more in common with them than we have not in common in terms of trying to find reasons and stuff to doubt that this may have happened. So I guess what I'm saying is you could find details, disagree with that particular detail, say that never happened. That part is mythicist. That never happened. It was invented. But then another part you might think actually did, or something about it is a kernel of truth or memory. The guy died somehow, probably by crucifixion. Okay, when? Maybe not actually when the Gospels narrate that he actually died. How exactly? Maybe not exactly how. Like, you know what I mean? But like, he probably died. I know that they want more. They want the bone, the femur bone, as I brought up. They want the foreskin of Jesus. They want the tomb in which he was.
They want physical, archaeological evidence. And the problem with that is most people like Jesus don't have that.
You never will.
You're not going to find archaeological evidence for Pythagoras or Socrates. Now they found Plato.
They found it. Yeah.
It's possible we can find something like that.
Yeah, to falsify the whole he didn't exist thing, you could find it. But then, how do you know that those bones were actually Jesus?
That's what it says.
Yeah. So there's always a.
No matter what. To be fair to them, though, we do have. They give us. Like the sources do give us like locations and tomb locations, and there are like possible locations, but we just never found anything.
Yeah.
So the question is, are those locations legit? Is there a Golgotha, right? Is there any of that? Like sometimes, this is why this is the point to the mythicists. They're right. Is like if they had these locations early on, and it's so important to the Christians that he was in this tomb. The tomb is so important to the narrative. You would be able to remember this.
Yeah, where's the veneration?
So that's a fun.
Which is why it might be a legend invented. The thing is, though, if it was a legend, wouldn't they have early on? And they may have. I mean, there may be second, third century Christians who did point to a tomb and say that's the one, and then they venerated it for a while, and there might be separate tombs. Just like today, bro. You and me went to Israel. How many freaking different tombs did Jesus rise from? There's different ones, right?
They took us a bunch of sites that they all thought was the site.
Yeah, they all think that he is where Peter.
Even the Garden of Gethsemane, like this one's it.
This is the garden. No, that's the garden.
Yeah, they don't know it. Nobody knows any of these spots or locations that Jesus was in.
Right.
That was my main takeaway from going there.
It was a lot of this.
How much we don't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
The only thing we know for sure was that there was a place where Pilate.
That was interesting.
We found the place that, if it did happen, would have been at that spot.
Right.
Pilate.
But either way, whether or not Jesus did or didn't, that is where Pilate would have operated his judgments from. He would have said.
You can have historical people that actually lived and did things in a setting of myth.
Yeah.
I mean, because we know Pilate existed doesn't mean Jesus existed either.
Right.
But it doesn't mean he didn't either. So you're kind of left in this balance. We're just hanging in the balance of what do we know? Here's the evidence. It doesn't. We can't disprove he existed.
Right.
But we can't prove it either.
And I think we have more in common. It's good that people are challenging and questioning these things because then we can sharpen our skills and try to investigate further. That's why I like having different views, different opinions. The only thing I'm not like, entertaining at this point is the idea that this special one virgin birth, right, happened, going back to the most basic thing. This would happen, but when you talk about the one in Suetonius, about Divine Augustus, that didn't happen. That's special pleading on a scale, like an unbelievable scale of special pleading that makes me think you're so dishonest. Like, you cannot, you're just so special pleading.
What is interesting about that is that Augustus is a real person that existed with mythology and legends attributed to him.
We can see it
They're
happening.
drawing it from other gods in the Mediterranean.
Right.
Applying it to him.
So I think that's also what's happening with Jesus.
Yeah, I do. Just to give you another example of a god having resurrection attributed to him, very much like Christ, we have, like I mentioned in another video we did, there's these Orphic tablets, these golden Orphic tablets. They find them all over the Mediterranean, and they all have similar. They all read like this. Some of them are identical. Some of them have little variants in them, but they're mostly, there's hundreds of these things. They read like this: a kid, I fell into milk.
That's what Dionysus did.
Yeah, but that's also what you do with a
Newborn.
the sacrifice.
Oh, hold on, falling into milk?
Yeah, it's like an animal kid
Okay.
falling into milk. It's a sacrificial animal.
I'm thinking of newborn, you know how women will produce milk.
Yeah, but they're not talking about a child, they're talking about a kid, which is an animal.
Okay.
That's what they call them, kids. It's in the Bible. A kid, it's a lamb. It's actually, is it a lamb? I think it's a lamb.
Okay.
But it might be a goat. But it's an animal, a kid that fell into milk. And it says, welcome thou, who has suffered such suffering as thou hast ever been suffered. From man, thou hast become a god, a kid,